this section, we're going to talk about how to support what I call dream-centered planning, rather than just the idea of helping people get a job. This is a term I created to make sure we're thinking of the big picture instead of the concrete now steps as we support people in choosing an initial direction. We know that occupational or vocational recovery is anything but linear, but here again, we're going to think about this section as if people really do sit down, plot out each step, and then move forward in measured ways. I wish sometimes that I had that in my life, but by and large, it's not the way most of us do it. If you think back on your own lived experience of work recovery, it's likely that some things were planned, others just happened by opportunity or happenstance, and other steps felt like backward steps, but then turned out to be some of the best forward steps you could have taken. So as we think about supporting people, we know that that's the way it'll go. But as we're really thinking for the first time about what are some of the steps that go into this process, we're going to think about them step by step. Karen Danley, who used to work at Boston University and was part of putting together psych rehab, used to say that one of the reasons that we really want to do all of these steps is to make the implicit explicit. So this means to name all of those, well, of course, steps. Because while they might seem like, of course, to one of us, it might be the very step that someone else could use some support with. So as we think of different steps and strategies of supporting dream-centered planning, we go into it knowing right at the start that no one walks it in a nice straight line. At the heart of dream-centered planning is the heart of who we are, what we want, what's important to us, and how do we find that? How do we find out what it is? And then how do we plan on getting there from here? Not everyone will have or want to find a dream in the classic sense to start with, and that of course is fine. In dream-centered planning, the big thing is that we're thinking first and foremost, what do you want? Let's look at some of the possible answers. The answer might be any job. I just want a job. It might be, I want money. And I know that probably the easiest way to get money right now is a job. It might be, what I want is to move out of this residential home to my own place, or move out of my mother's house to my own place, whatever. It might be, I want to be an astronaut. Or it might be, I don't know. I have no idea. But I would like to figure it out. Those answers alone begin to give us information about how to support someone. So let's start with the person who doesn't know and wants to find out. This is another place that we as peer specialists can fill in some gaps around other services that are out there around employment. And this fits in nicely with our idea of a linear presentation, or a presentation of the linear process. At one end of the spectrum are people with no idea at all. And at the other end are the people who know exactly where they want to go. So we'll start with the person who has no idea, but doesn't want to get a job for a secondary reason, like to get the money to move out of mom's house. Here, we really want to support the person to not fall into or be placed into any job that fits their current capabilities and then move on as if it's done. We want to really start to think of what is the trajectory, what is the road, what is the path of vocational and occupational recovery for this person that we're working with. Here's where we'll, in this part of the curriculum, we'll start to see that we're going to be using this wonderful combination of the gifts of peer support, some new knowledge and tools, and the use of other resources. This is a stage, this place of figuring out where I'm going to go and what's the plan and how do I get there, where all three of these will come in together. But we're going to start with working with the person before we bring in anything else. Your own recovery may or may not have involved taking the time to think about your dream. Maybe you're just beginning to do that now. That's the great thing about this path, is that we can take any of the steps at any time. But for the sake of the example, as I said, let's start with the person who has no idea, and we'll call him Jose. He's really hoping you or someone can help him to begin to think about what it would look like to be working someplace, doing something he liked, if only he could figure that piece out. So how do we know what we like? How do any of us know what we like? Where do we get that information? Think about this for yourself. What would you do to begin to figure out what you liked? For many of us, it's through our experiences that we've already had that we can begin to identify what we've liked, and just as important, what we haven't liked. If we're thinking in psych rehab terms, we'd call this exploring our preferences as we think about choosing a direction. There's a very simple way that we can do this. We can just look at this sheet and look at our background and say, well, I've done blah, blah. When I did that, I liked this and I didn't like that. Looks pretty simple, but give it a try. You actually have one worksheet in your workbook. I've done this myself, and it takes some thought, it takes some time to really go back and say, well, what was it about this that I liked, and what was it that I didn't like? And it doesn't have to be experiences that were either all good, like this was an experience I liked, and this was one that I didn't like. Usually, in just about anything we do, there's a combination, and out of that combination, we begin to cull out those likes and dislikes. So Jose might look at this and say, well, you know, I've been part of a baseball team in my neighborhood since I was 8 years old. And what I've always loved about doing that is I've loved the camaraderie about that. I've loved having a coach there. He's become really a good friend. So I've liked sort of having that mentor coach in my life. And I've liked the camaraderie of the team as well. What I didn't like so much about it is, you know, I'm really not that physical of a guy. I don't really like doing that kind of stuff that much. And sports, you know, isn't my top thing. So that piece of it certainly wasn't my strongest interest in there. So that's just one example of what this might look like, right? But now it's really important for us to remember, though, that we're not going to do this like as an assessment, because we're not voc rehab specialists. We're simply peer specialists. And so we're going to do this from the place of peer-to-peer approaches, whether that be to do it over coffee and conversation, to share it as something that's been helpful and see if it's something that Jose would find helpful, etc. But it is from that peer-to-peer approach. So let's look at what that might actually look like. If I were working with Jose and he said, I don't know what I want or even what I like, I might say something like, well, can you think of any things you did in the past that you really like? Doesn't have to be a job, just anything. And then depending on his answer, I might ask more open-ended questions, or tell him that I know that some people have tapped into what they liked and didn't like by doing a self-help worksheet, where they just thought through all the different kinds of activities And out of thinking through, we're able to begin to get some of those answers. But of course, in all peer support work, we're guided from our place of relationship. And this is going to really give us the direction of how we do this with somebody. Depending on my relationship with Jose and what I know about him, who he is, how he likes to connect, and what kind of time together is useful, I'd make choices on how to introduce this or any kind of supporting tool. So let's look at a few possibilities of what that might look like. One piece is certainly the connecting, and how we connect is important. We all have different ways of connecting that are meaningful to us. Some of us are what are called physical connectors, who just like to be in the same space. And so if Jose were more of a physical connector, I might have a very informal conversation with him about this stuff while we're playing a game of cards, or going to the store, or doing some other activity that involves sharing space while we're doing an outside thing. If Jose were an emotional connector, and that's somebody, as it sounds like, who connects really on the feeling level, I might be talking to him more about how it feels to do this kind of exploring, and if he'd like to do it together with a worksheet or just talking, and which way feels best for him, if any of them feel right for him. And I'd really be connecting on that feeling level with him. If Jose were more of an intellectual connector, I might think more talking about the pros and cons of thinking through past experiences as one way of exploring what his preferences might be. Or if I've seen that Jose is really a spiritual kind of guy who likes to think about the big picture and the whys and all of that of life, I might really talk to him more about, what have been some of the big themes in your life, or the big values that have brought meaning, and connect with him more on this level. And this, of course, is a simplistic explanation. We bring many factors into it, and you know what these are. You've had many experiences in your peer support work to do this. And so it's really the idea of drawing on our relationship and what we know about the person and how to best connect, that any tool that we think about is sort of brought into the conversation, staying very much peer to peer in doing it. Another way that we can really support people to begin to think about what they like, what they want, and where they might want to go is to tap into the dreams of yesterday. Asking great open-ended questions like, maybe when you were 10, what did you dream of? Or if there was a magic wand that could take away all the things that seem like they're in their way, like your diagnosis or your felony record, all of these kind of things that somebody might see as the big blocks. Let's take those away. Then what do you think you'd like to do? Creative questions like this are great ways to start the conversation to help people tap into that place. And again, of course, this comes from our relationship, the way we would do this. But why dreams? Why are we spending time even thinking about tapping into the dreams? Why not just sort of look at the newspaper or look online and see what's out there and say, well, which ones of these really sort of talk to you the most, and go from there? Well, what I think about are two huge studies that were done. And these were studies that were sort of a piece of a much larger program, pilot program that got lots of funding and lots of support. And these really became sort of the gold standard of the way employment supports are offered in 2012 and on, sort of in our decade. And a lot was learned from those studies. A lot was learned about what helps. But there was another striking thing that was learned that I think us as peer specialists especially really want to be mindful of and want to be gearing our support to others with this very clear in our mind. The first study was what was called the EIDP, and that stands for the Employment Intervention Demonstration Program. It included 1,600 people, and they were scattered around 8 different programs that provided this combination of the best supports that people think about. Things like, one-on-one support to really be thinking through these options about working and what do I want to do and all of that, and how do I get to a job and interview, all of those pieces. In addition, they integrated clinical care with vocational support so that people weren't ending up being pulled between vocational people who were saying, yeah, let's go, let's work, and psychiatrists or treatment teams that were saying, no, 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 so that everybody was sort of on the same page. And it included, as I say, all sorts of supports, and they were well funded, or at least better funded than most. And so these were programs that had investment to really show what things would, in the end, be the most effective ways to enhance the employment outcomes of people with psychiatric conditions. And in the end, they found that there were great results, that employment rised, people got more jobs, and all of this kind of great stuff. But it also showed in the end that 69% of the people who were on Social Security benefits were still in this category of what's called the working poor. These are people working dead-end part-time jobs that have no health benefits, no sick time, no security, and certainly nothing that leads to an ongoing path towards financial security and self-sufficiency and occupational and vocational recovery. People got in jobs, they sort of got to their niche of safety, and then it stopped. There was no support to help people figure out how to move over those barriers to the next place. The second study was done of what's called IPS, or Individualized Placement and Support. And this is the type of employment services that we find integrated in mental health services all over the country and in parts of Canada, England. It's huge, right? And we'll talk more about this a lot in the next section. And after they've done all of these programs in all of these places, there was a certain core group that they followed over 12 years. And at the end of the 12 years, what they're saying about this employment support approach is that it's incredibly successful. And then there's this little note that sort of says, of the 34 of the 38 people, or 89%, that's right, 89% are still receiving benefits and in dead-end part-time jobs and still on benefits. And these are the gold standards. These are the employment supports and the employment programs that are the ones that, when we talk about programs in the next unit, these are the ones we're going to be talking about. These are the ones that everybody looks to. And yet, what we see is that people are not being supported to tap into dreams of something bigger, of being supported to know that they can get there and that they will be supported beyond just a short time in a new dead-end job where they start, but instead will be supported through a process of moving towards where you want to go. So that's why we are going to be starting with the dream. Does the person have a dream? Did the person have a dream that we should re-tap into? Where does the person want to go? And what can we do to begin to set those fires a flame of hope for a bigger, better occupational recovery? And of course, once we bring up those words, dream-centered planning, the issue of being realistic always comes up. Of course, the real question is realistic to whom? And the only one who should be answering that is the person who's making the choice. Because what I know from personal experience is that none of us knows what is or isn't realistic. And at this point, I'd like to share a really poignant story that I have from my own lived experience that I share often, but that is because it is so powerful to me about this idea of what's realistic and what's not. At one point in my time, I was in a day treatment program. It was, to me, one of the lowest points of my life, and I was in the greatest despair I had ever felt. I was in my 30s, and I was in my mid-30s probably, and I couldn't believe that this is where my life had led. It wasn't where I planned. And I just really didn't see a future for myself. I was one of these people who was very frequently suicidal and often acted on it in serious ways. And I was just in this place of despair and really questioning whether or not there was any reason to stay alive at all. And then from somewhere, and I'll tell you, I have no idea to this day where this idea came from, but I got this idea about going to paralegal school. And there was something about this that so spoke to me. And of course, you can't see me right now, but when I tell this story, it's an amazing thing that happens. And now we're many years later, it happens every time, is I find the minute I say I'm going to be a paralegal, my shoulders go back, my lungs fill up with more air, and there's a much more solid me right here. And it just happened a minute ago yet again. So I was going to be a paralegal, and my eyes brightened, and I saw a future for myself, and I got this excitement that I hadn't felt in so long that I couldn't even count when I had last felt something this incredibly moving and exciting, and it was like doors were opening and opening and opening in front of me, like, wow, there's some sun out there, and the sun was coming back in and warming me again after being cold for so long. And I went into my day treatment program the next day, and I said, listen, guys, I figured it out. I'm going to go to paralegal school. And they said, well, we're very glad that this is something you're thinking about. And I want to say right here, these were good people. These are committed people. I actually know them today. And these were not people that would ever in a million years want to harm me in any way. But anyway, back to that moment, and they said, yes, we're really glad that you're thinking about this, but let's think for a minute and let's think. And they sort of like tried to get their words out, and they said, you know, we think that might be a good idea at some point, and it might be something for us to think about down the line, maybe in a year or so, and maybe, you know, don't know, but maybe this is actually your illness, you know, telling you that you can do this, and you know, we think maybe you should see your psychopharm this afternoon, and I don't know if you can feel it through the sound waves, but I can feel it as I'm telling it, as it always happens. Sort of the shoulders come back in, and I get smaller again, and that sense of total defeat, that sense of the darkness just totally enveloping me again. And it was almost like it was thicker now. It was so thick and so dark and so cold. And I went home, and I knew that night my choices were really, really clear. I was either going to paralegal school, or it was the end. It was that simple. And as it turned out, I did choose paralegal school, and I called them the next morning and said, well, I'm off to paralegal school. And off I went. And what was really important was what led them to their doubts and their statements, and then what happened for me. Their doubts were based on what they saw in front of them. And there was nothing that they saw that would say I could do it. What they saw was a person who was probably at best out of the hospital for 2 or 3 week stretches at that point, a person who basically couldn't function in their lives, a person who was very self-injurious and in some risk of survival from that. They saw many good reasons to say, not so sure this is going to work right now. And I called them the next day and I said, well, it's been nice, guys, but I'm out of here. I'm off to paralegal school. And they suggested that I come by and at least terminate with them, but I knew that that probably meant that an ambulance would be picking me up in the middle of the time. So I said, well, thanks, but no thanks, I'm out of here. And I went to paralegal school. And the most amazing thing happened was for someone, you know, who hadn't been able to live their life in any way, I went through paralegal school, and I went every day, and I did my studying, and I ended up graduating second in my class. And it's an amazing thing what hope does. It's an amazing thing what having something out there that says you can come to me, and moving towards it. It's amazing what that can do. And hope, as I said, to me, hope moves mountains. And nobody knows what's realistic for us or not. Nobody knows that. We don't even know sometimes. When we get that hope and that belief, we can do sometimes the unbelievable. And it may be unbelievable to ourselves as well. And that was for me. I had no idea I could have done that. And it wasn't an easy year. It was probably one of the hardest years of my life. I graduated. I got the job of my dreams based on the schooling. And then the next month I was back in the hospital, but it didn't matter. I had done this piece of work that would be with me from that point on. Nobody could take that away from me. And out of that, I learned the most important lesson, which is that none of us ever know. And so we as peer specialists, one of our most important things to do is to nurture that dream, to pull out that dream, and to keep any naysayers at bay who try to step in and say, oh, that's not realistic. Oh, that's a bad choice for you. That's our job as peer specialists, because if anyone knows, whether it be in our vocational recovery or in our recovery in general, we are the evidence that only time will tell. And so it was just a really important lesson that I learned. Now, it may have turned out to not be realistic. It might not have worked out well. We don't know. So let's think of this, the person in our examples, Sally, who says she wants to be an astronaut. And I'm calling her Sally for Sally Ride. Sally knows where she wants to go, and that's our green signal. That means let's go. So if we were to talk to Sally and she presented this, what are some of the things we might say to her? Think about it for a minute and what you might say to her. And depending on who Sally is, it may be that in your mind you're saying, not sure this is going to work, Sally, and that's okay. That's human. But what we don't do is then voice that. So instead of voicing that, what might we say? Here's a couple of things that I might say. I might say, wow, Sally, an astronaut. Tell me more about that and what led you to want to be an astronaut. Or, wow, what kind of things do you do as an astronaut now that they're not going to the moon? Or, wow, I can't even imagine what you have to know to be able to be an astronaut. What do you need to know about? What kind of schooling do you have? I might just ask open-ended questions like that of her. And of course, we know that the answers can go several ways. Sally might say, well, I didn't mean an astronaut really, but just something like that. Or she very well could tell you all about it and confirm that that's where she wants to go. Or it might even be that she can't tell you much about it at all and then says, this is still where I want to go. Doesn't matter, because in the end, Sally continues to drive the process rather than anyone else coming in and telling her that she can or can't do this. Next, as we do in all peer support, we might support Sally to do more exploring, to be able to go sort of from an idea to a more concrete picture. And she might see all the information and continue to confirm that that's where she wants to go. Or here again, she may begin to veer off in other directions, but again, still as the driver of the process. In the next section, we'll be talking about services of vocational rehabilitation agencies in each state and other work supports that exist. But in this example, what we're talking about is supporting Sally to begin to define what her direction is going to be in a concrete enough way that these other services can actually be helpful and effective for her. When we talk about the services in the next section, we'll talk about what they do and where they can help and where they might not be as helpful. And if we were working with Sally at this point and she went to VR, my guess is that the idea of astronaut would be out the window before she got through the door. And what might have happened in that is that it wouldn't just be her choice that had been sort of pushed aside, but also her hope, her drive, her motivation, her vision, all of that. And that's what we don't want to see happen. So let's go back to Sally. So we're going to do some exploring with Sally, right? And it may be that, doesn't really matter. She may decide to go in that direction. Or she may decide that, I love this area, but I don't really know. It's not being an astronaut, but I don't really know exactly where it would be. And I want to continue to explore. And in the meantime, we can even support that exploration through work. That's a wonderful thing about the idea of learning labs, as we talked about in the last section, is work itself can become the exploration area. So, for example, Sally may decide that while she's doing the exploration, what she knows about it is that she loves all the planet stuff. She doesn't know what else she'd do with that except for sort of fly up on rockets to any great degree. But she knows this is where she wants to go. And so as we're thinking about and brainstorming alternatives and ideas to how to find out more and get more information, but not hold Sally back and say, well, we don't have enough information yet. That green light just went to yellow blinking or red, Instead, we're going to brainstorm where can we learn more. And so, for example, Sally, if she lived in my area, might decide to work or volunteer at the planetarium, at the Science Museum. And then now we've got something more concrete that we can really begin starting our plan with. So we have sort of the direction that's born out of the dream, and we've got concrete places to start. and they're only starts. They're not finished. It's not, okay, Sally, great. You're going to go volunteer. It's been nice knowing you. Instead, it's going to be great. Let's see what we can get from there. So as we see, it's really about brainstorming within people's choices. The other way it may go with Sally is that she may decide to totally switch directions, right? Or it may be that that's exactly where she's still going to go. And if that's the case, we just bring it back to the first step and get started. It may be that Sally doesn't even have a GED yet, right? First step is going to be get your GED. Let's make a plan on how you do that. No matter which of these different scenarios it ends up being, a big part of the process is helping people get the gift of starting. In the end, that can play such a major role. Most of life, for many of us, is about making a plan and starting, and then as we're walking down the road, we veer off as opportunities present themselves. But as we remember also from those studies, is that if we're not supporting the ongoing dream and the ongoing journey, and we're allowing this to just sort of be good enough, people may never have the opportunity to take those side roads to something better. And that's, again, the great gift of peer support in this framework of employment support, is how can we keep that piece going. So what we've talked about in this section is really about starting the process of tapping into the dreams, helping people figure out things about what they've liked, what they haven't liked. And there are exercises in your workbook to do this more fully with yourself first, which is a great place to start, maybe with someone else. But the whole point here is that no matter where someone is in the process, whether they're taking a job to get money for now while they explore, whether they've explored and are starting at the very first step of a very long journey, or are anywhere in between there, we want to keep supporting people to tap into the idea of occupational recovery, vocational recovery, and not just get a job. In the next section, when we come back, we'll start integrating other supports that can help. In this section, we really talked about those pieces that we can bring in outside of those other things. When we bring in those other services, we'll also talk about our role in supporting people's use of it and how those other services work in their most effective ways. So thanks, and I hope we see you then. Bye-bye.